Hello and welcome to another video. My name is CJ the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be breaking down and making our final 2020 prediction for the US House, and the first US House prediction I've ever done on this channel. Probably should have done those, but I just was preoccupied with other things. So we're going to be starting this prediction off in the East and moving west. I've already filled out 184 seats that are either safe, lean, or likely for the Republicans, and 221 seats for the Democrats, which already has them at a projected majority. Of course, it is possible for Republicans to take the House, but at this point, I would give that probably around a 5% chance. It's very, in fact, I don't know if it's ever happened where an incumbent president lost the House and regained it later on down the road. That's, of course, implying that Trump wins. If Biden wins, of course, he will probably keep the House and maybe lose it in 2022. In fact, he probably will lose it in 2022, based on how American electoral trends work. We're going to start off with New York's 22nd district, which went to the Democrat, unseated Republican incumbent, by around a point or so. Polling actually does indicate that this race is close. However, I still see the Democrat as the narrow favorite of the race based on those polls, and also based on the fact that it's very rare for the state of New York to unseat a Democratic incumbent, except, of course, in New York's 11th district, which has incumbent Democrat Max Rose. We only have one poll from the district, but it actually has him losing. But based on the fact that Staten Island is a very Republican place, and this was a district that President Trump won by a very sizable, I think a safe margin in 2016, I don't really see that shifting so much in just one election, so I have the Republican as the favorite. Next, we're going to look at Pennsylvania's 1st district with the Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, who seems to be indestructible. He survived 2018. Of course, he won by a landslide in 2016. Not a landslide, 10 points, but still very impressive for a suburban Philadelphia district. Polls indicate that Fitzpatrick is up pretty comfortably. I feel like this is going to be a likely race. I feel like Fitzpatrick will probably win by around 7 to 10 points based on the polling, which has him up massively in this race. I think it will get closer, but at the end of the day, I think he'll do fairly well since he's done a good job of painting himself as a moderate Republican in today's very partisan political era. Next, we're going to be looking at the 10th district of Pennsylvania, which makes up Dauphin County and some other rural counties in southern Pennsylvania, but the big swing point in this district, of course, is the city of Harrisburg, which leans heavily Democratic, and the rest of the district, which leans much more Republican. Polling does indicate that this race is a lean Republican race. The reason I put it up as a toss-up before is because it was a very close race. It was within around 2 points or so, so I put it on this list. But I think at the end of the day, the polls are going to be fairly right, and I think this race is going to stay in Republican hands. So far, no changing of parties in Pennsylvania. We're going to move on down to Virginia's 2nd district, which flipped to Democratic in 2018 by several points, unseating Republican incumbent Scott Taylor. Of course, this time around, Virginia is expected to go to Biden even more so than it did to Hillary Clinton in 2016. So based on that, and based on polling in the district, which has the Democrat up in nearly every poll, the latest poll actually had the Democrat up by around 7 points. I think it's safe to say that the Democratic incumbent will keep their seat, and will put this as a lean Republican race. Next, we're going to look at North Carolina's 9th district. This was the district in 2018 that had to be redone due to ballot harvesting. It was actually, the mail-in ballots were actually harvested by the Republican Mike Harris, who I think ended up going to jail or something. And the current Congressman Bishop actually won this race by a somewhat small margin. But in 2016, this race went pretty comfortably to the Republican. But based on current political trends in the state of North Carolina and suburbs as a whole, I still think this race will stay in Republican hands, but I still think it's going to be within a margin of around 2 to 4 points, so I'm going to rank it as a lean Republican. Next, we're going to go to Joe Cunningham's district, South Carolina's 1st district. Joe Cunningham won his race by only a point in the 2018 midterms. Polling indicates in this race that he is in big trouble. He's a very conservative Democrat, which has pissed off members of his party, as well as Republicans who think he's too left-wing, since he's a Democrat. This was a district that has a Cook PVI of, I believe, around 8 or so, which makes it prime Republican territory. However, the only poll that has Cunningham up is a Democratic-leaning one, and it has him up massively, so it kind of screws with the polling aggregate. So I think this race is going to flip very narrowly to the Republican. I think it'll be close, but we're going to put it as tilt Republican for now, because Joe Cunningham is not that controversial, but I still think he'll lose his race based on the fact that all the other polls have the Republican up, and this is a race that has a Cook PVI of around 8. Next, we're going to look at Georgia 6th and Georgia 7th. Both, I think, are fair to say are toss-ups, considering in 2018 they both went to their respected winner by less than a point. Georgia 7th was very, very, very close, but at the end of the day, the Republican still prevailed. Georgia 6 is the district of Lucy McBath. This was also Newt Gingrich's district back since the 1970s, and one of the first districts in the Georgia metro to actually flip to the Republicans. Now, current polling in this district is actually favorable to Lucy McBath. Karen Handel, who was the former incumbent of this seat, is running again, but Lucy McBath has been up in the polls fairly comfortably. I think this race is probably going to be likely Democratic. I think Lucy McBath will probably win by around 7 or 8 points. As for Georgia's 7th district, the Republican incumbent, Rob Woodall, barely survived his challenger in 2018. Nonetheless, he has decided to run for re-election again in 2020. The polls in this race actually are very favorable to the Democrat, and based on the trends of suburban Georgia, I think I'm probably going to put this race in the tilt Democratic column. I think it'll be pretty close considering it's a general election, but I think at the end of the day, this race is actually going to flip to the Democrats, but very, very narrowly. So that has Democrats at 225 to Republicans 188. Next, we'll go to the Midwest and look at the Iowa House races. In 2018, both of these races actually were somewhat lopsided. So this one I actually should have ranked as likely Democrat, but I didn't. This was the race I really wanted to talk about. Iowa's 3rd district with Cindy. I don't know that last name. I don't know how to say that, so I'm not going to attempt it. Polling in this district has been favorable to her, and I think ultimately it's going to be a lean Democratic race. Even if the state of Iowa, which I think is very likely, will go to the Republican, Donald Trump, I think that the popular vote for this seat, for Iowa as a whole, is going to go to the Democrats in the House races. Next, we're going to look at the state of Minnesota, which had a lot of close House races in 2018. 2 changes, 2 Democrat, which I think are going to stay. And, of course, we have one incumbent Democrat, Colin Peterson, who is considered a blue dog Democrat. This area, this is the Iron Range. This area of Minnesota has been trending heavily in favor of Republicans, which has put Peterson in a lot of trouble. I believe Peterson has been the incumbent in this district for a fairly long time, but current trends indicate that he is in a lot of trouble, especially with Trump on the ticket. In 2016, he did fairly well, but again, that's a race that's a little bit too close for comfort. Polling in the race actually has been favorable to his Republican opponent by a good amount. And based on the trends, I think I'm going to flip this race narrowly to his Republican opponent, which will be probably a lean margin, 3 or 4 points, but I think it'll be fairly close. I think Republicans' gains in District 8 and District 1 are also going to stay as well. So District 8 will probably be likely, District 1 will be lean, and of course I predicted this race already will be likely Democrat. So that is going to be it for the state of Minnesota. Next, we're going to move on to the state of Nebraska. Almost went over it. Nebraska's 2nd is really interesting because in 2018, Don Bacon only won his race by around 2 points against his opponent, Carr Eastman. And they're actually versing again for a rematch in 2020. So that will be pretty interesting. Polls in this race have actually been favorable to Bacon, and Cara Eastman has actually been doing worse in the polls than in 2018. I think the reason she got so close in 2018 was purely just because of the the blue wave factor rather, which almost knocked off Don Bacon, but did not. I think Don Bacon at the end of the day will win by a lean margin, but Cara Eastman is a very strong opponent, and he's certainly going to have a run for his money in that seat. Again, Nebraska's second on the presidential level is a different story, because in some races this district has trended blue, but in this case I think Don Bacon is going to hold on to his seat. Next we're going to look at Oklahoma's 5th district, which is a district that is one of the reddest districts that was flipped in 2018. I think it has a Cook PVI of around plus 10 in favor of Republicans. In 2016, Democrat Kendra Horn only won this race by a point, of course unseating Steve Russell, who was the incumbent Republican in that seat. Current polls indicate that this race is going to be very, very, very close. Based on the leanings of the district as a whole, though, I do give the Republican a slight advantage. I think the Republican will probably win by a lean margin just because it is a general election. This is also a district that Trump, I believe, carried by around 10 points. I could be a little off, but it's a district that Trump carried massively, and I don't really see the state of Oklahoma moving that much more to the left up until the 2020 election. Next, we're going to look at the state of New Mexico. New Mexico has one competitive House race, and that is New Mexico's 2nd district, which was won by the Democrat by a 0.2% margin, or 0.1, whatever. One of the closest margins, I think, in all of the 2018 House races, or at least one of the most close. There was not a whole lot of polling for this district. Torres Small earlier on was favored to win the race, but based on the fact that Republican primary turnout was higher than Democratic primary turnout is actually interesting. This is a district that is also, I think, plus 9 in favor of Republicans. So based on that factor alone, I feel comfortable probably switching the district to Republican just because Republicans seem to be energized to get Torres Small out of this seat and reclaim their one House seat that they have in the state of New Mexico. Next, we're going to go to Texas, in which there are 3 toss-up seats that I have indicated in the state. Of course, there is Texas's 23rd, which is occupied by Will Hurd. He's not running for re-election this time, and polling has been very favorable to the Democrat in this race. I think Will Hurd, being the moderate Republican that he is, was the only type of Republican that could really win in this kind of district, which has the outskirts of El Paso, and going down to near border region here. I give this the edge to the Democrat. I think it'll probably be won by a lean margin or so. Next, we're going to look at the district, the 21st district, which was only won by around 3 points. I think it's fair to say that is a toss-up district in 2018. If we go back to 2016, not 2016, there's 2016. This was a district that was won by a safe margin, so we've seen the massive shift in Texas, mostly due to the high turnout of the 2018 election, and that turnout is expected to be repeated in 2020. In fact, it surpassed 2016's turnout. So we're going to have a really high turnout election, which is going to really affect these down ballot races as well as the presidential. So far, Chip Roy has been leading in his polls in this race, and I don't really see any reason why he's going to lose, but I think it will be close again just because Texas as a whole is trending much more Democratic. Last but not least, of course, we have Texas's 31st district, what am I doing tonight? Which has been leading narrowly Republican. I don't really think that's going to change. So far, polling indicates that this race is going to stay in Republican hands quite comfortably. I'm comfortable rating this race as safe Republican based on the fact that the polling is massively in favor of the Republican in that race. Next, we have Arizona, which actually has 3 House races that came pretty close. This one, I did not really go through all of these, but this one I'm going to rate as likely Democrat. And of course, we have Arizona's 6th and Arizona's 8th, both races that went to their Republican incumbents fairly comfortably. Of course, Arizona has since trended more Democratic based on polling, and these seats could be in jeopardy in the 2020 House races. Arizona's 8th we're going to rank as safe Republican. Polling in that race has actually been very good for the Republican incumbent. However, Arizona's 6th is very contentious. Of course, we're in suburban Phoenix now, and polls have actually been neck and neck in this race between the Republican and the Democrat. Pollsters, RCP has rated this as a lean Republican race. Everyone else has it as toss-up. I think it'll probably narrowly go to the Republican, although I think it might be a tilt margin. Polls are literally neck and neck in this House race, and last time, however, this was a race won by the Republican by 10 points in a blue wave year. So the fact that this race is close should be concerning to Republicans. Next, we're going to look at Utah, Utah's 4th district, which is occupied by Ben McAdams. Again, another super close race in 2018, and a very narrow flip. Of course, people have been saying Utah has been trending blue. I don't really see that. They just don't really like Trump very much, but they're still going to vote for him regardless. This is a race, of course, with Ben McAdams, who is the Democratic incumbent. So far, polling in this race indicates that he may narrowly keep his seat. But again, Burgess Owens, who is the Republican, has actually been neck and neck with him. So based on the fact that this district is so heavily Republican, I'm probably going to favor Owens very narrowly. Will probably make it a tilt margin. But I think Ben McAdams might lose his seat very narrowly just because this is a general election year and this is not a blue wave year. And Utah as a whole is not really trending that much more Democratic. It is trending Democratic, but not nearly as quick as a state like Texas, Arizona, or Georgia is. Finally, the last state we're going to look at in their House races is the state of California, because there were quite a few contentious ones back in 2018. Of course, we have Devin Nunes's old district, California's 22nd district, which last time went to the Republicans by around 5 or so points. That's Texas' 4th, Texas' 22nd. I think this race is probably going to stay in Republican hands by a likely margin. Of course, we have California's 4th. Some of these I forgot to fill in, so I'm just filling them in now. I think that'll actually be safe. Of course, we have California's 10th with Josh Herter, which I think will probably stay in Democratic hands. Polls indicate it will probably be by a lean margin or so. Of course, we have California's 21st. Now, this is probably the most interesting one because I'm actually projecting a flip in favor of the Republicans. Polling has actually been fairly bad for TJ Cox, the Democrat, in this race, and he actually is projected to be losing his seat by my calculations. Of course, polling has actually been really bad for him, which is surprising. I guess the people of the district don't really like him, but this is going to be one flip in California in favor of the Republicans. And finally, we have California's 25th congressional district, which had its special election earlier this year with Mike Garcia and Christy Smith. Of course, if we go back to 2018, Katie Hill unseated Steve Knight by a very sizable margin. Of course, in the special election, Mike Garcia came back. But polling has actually been favorable to Mike Garcia in this race, and I actually think it will stay in his hands very narrowly. I'm going to put it as a lean Republican race. This was actually a race a few months ago I thought was actually going to flip back to Democrats, but the polling has actually indicated that Mike Garcia is in a strong position to win his re-election. Despite this district actually have gone to Clinton by a sizable amount in 2016. But anyway, guys, that is going to be it for today's video. I've projected the House 231 seats for the Democrats. Oh, we have one toss-up seat. Where is that toss-up seat? That is interesting. Because I don't want to leave that blank, so we'll have to figure out where that is. Alright, so I completely skipped over Florida's, what district is this? Whoops. I completely skipped over Florida's 26th district. I should have realized. I thought I had that. I thought I put that as tilt blue or whatever, but I actually didn't, and I just completely skipped over it for some reason. So let's take a look at this district. This was a district that flipped to the Democrats by around a point or so in the 2018 midterms. Of course, this time around, polling has actually been favorable to the Democrat consistently. However, originally this race was ranked as safe or likely Democrat, but I think it'll only be lean Democrat just because polls have actually tightened consistently. So now, anyway, guys, that is going to be it for the House prediction. 203 seats for the Republican, 232 seats for the Democrats. I think even if I'm off by a few seats, this is roughly the amount we're going to see on Election Day. I think Republicans are going to stay over the 200 seat mark, but I think they have around a 5% chance of actually winning the House, which is virtually no chance of winning the House in the 2020 election. That's just how American political trends are. But anyway, Democrats losing some seats, Republicans losing like 1 or 2 or so. But anyway, guys, that is it for today's video. Please leave a like, thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss a single video I put out. I'll also be releasing my final 2020 general election prediction video tomorrow, so please check that out, and I hope to see you in the next one.